Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome, everybody, to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses. I almost got my name wrong this week. With Ardina Seward. Charles is a little bit under the weather today, so Charles won't be here. How are you, Ardina?
I'm good. Got a bee sting while I was out there cutting the hedges. The arborvitae. Those are vicious little insects.
You should be raising honeybees.
No, I tried. I destroyed their nest. I got so mad.
Well, they have a right to be mad if you destroyed their nest.
Well, this was after the
turnaround is fair play.
After the bite, it's like, okay, you're gonna bite me? All right, good for you. I got something for you. So I got out that cutter insect spray.
Ladies and gentlemen, if anyone wants to discuss with Ardina her insect skills, please give a call. It's 914-636-0110. Now, we're making light of something, but today actually, it is Labor Day, and Labor Day is a holiday where we remember people. And our guest today has been in the news the last few weeks for a person who was convicted of murdering his mother in front of him and his mother's friend in South Salem in 1977. And we have Jason Minter with us today to discuss the fact that the last person imprisoned for his mother's murder and the person who actually inflicted the damage to his mother and to Sheila Watson was present and heard and saw what had happened. But Ayala, who is the what's his first name?
Samuel Ayala. Sam Ayala.
Sam Ayala is about to get out of prison unless he's already gotten out. Jason, I know that he could have gotten out as early as September 3rd. Are you going to be told when he gets out of prison?
Yes, he's not out as of yet, but there's something called VineLink, which sends you texts. You receive texts regarding the inmate's release. So we have not received any indication that he's out yet.
You must have very strong feelings and thoughts about this guy getting out of prison.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there were three men who were involved in this, one of which one of the others was involved with the actual murders and the rapes. That was Willie Prophet, and he passed away in prison of brain cancer, 7 or 8 years ago. There was James Walls, who was the driver and was outside at the time that the violence occurred and had no prior violent offenses on his record. And he was released late last year.
With your support?
With my support, yes. I felt like 43 years was enough time for what James Walls had done, and he had reached out to me in a very, I felt, legitimate and heartfelt way. Ayala, on the other hand, was the mastermind of the whole thing, and unlike Willie Prophet, who had a very low IQ and was easy to manipulate, Ayala was a bright guy. And I feel like he's, sort of waited out the system, and he's finally getting out, unfortunately.
And there's no way to stop it?
It doesn't appear that there is. I mean, things don't look right in the way that they were done. It does appear that one of the board members was leading him on during his last parole hearing, giving him opportunities and coaching him to say things.
Was that the person that was mentioned in the Post?
Yes.
Tana
Agostini is her name.
Who's married to a
convicted murderer.
Right.
Yes.
How did she get on the board?
That's a really good question. I don't really know how that all worked out. But there's 2 pages of redacted information. Only names and medical issues are supposed to be redacted in these parole reports. So we're really interested in what those.
And there's no court actions you can do?
Doesn't appear that way. We're certainly looking into all possibilities, but as of now, it looks like we have very little recourse.
Did you reach out to the district attorney?
Oh, the district attorney's furious here in Westchester. He wrote a scathing letter to the board saying that he couldn't believe that the board would make such a ridiculous decision. So when the men were sentenced in 1977, the maximum sentence was 25 years to life. Even if they got 25-year to life sentences, which they did, they would run concurrently. In 1978, that law was changed to consecutively, but it was too late for our situation. But the DA did say that it was their wish that these men would not come up for parole.
And yet,
until
they've been coming up since 2002.
Yeah, they have, yes.
Now, what are the consequences if he violates parole when he gets out? Would he be sent back to serve out a lifetime sentence, or is it just one of those things where you were a bad boy and you're going to have to go back and serve, another 3 years?
I think it just would be based on whatever offense he whatever he did on the outside world. He certainly wouldn't go away for life unless he did something egregious.
What was his background?
He was a small-time crook. He robbed a few places here and there. He did time, dealt drugs. He was born in Puerto Rico, came over here when he was a kid to the States. Evidently, according to his last parole hearing, he's very angry at women because his mother didn't treat him well and his sister, quote-unquote, rejected him.
So that somehow justified in his mind the crime that he committed.
Yes.
We're going to go to break. When we come back, I don't think Ardina and I want you to relive the moment, but we'd like to discuss that day with you if you're willing to
Certainly.
do that. All right, so this is Westchester Eye on the radio on WVOX and WVOX.com. We'll be right back after a Fox News and Fox Business News break. Please stay tuned. Thank you.
.1460 WVOX.
Let's return to Westchester Eye on the radio with Peter Moses on 1460 WVOX.
And thanks for staying with us. We are back. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. I am Ardina Stewart along with Pete Moses. And our guest today is Jason Minter, whose mother was tragically killed in 1977 in a very bucolic town, and it was a heinous crime.
By the way, we haven't said her name. Her name was Bonnie Minter.
And may she rest in peace. But the killer, the murderer, has been paroled.
Or is in the process of being paroled.
No, he's been granted parole. They're just waiting now for proper
release date.
For proper housing. And the question is, what happens after that? And Jason, we were talking during the break about the possibility of his going to Texas, where he supposedly has family. Now, is there a follow-up or coordination between the New York Parole Board and the Texas Parole Board, a kind of watchdog mechanism that would let you know in case he committed a crime in Texas and would be sent back to New York?
I'm part of this system called VineLink, which notifies whoever wants to be notified of an inmate's whereabouts, or an ex-inmate's whereabouts, or parolee's whereabouts, I guess I should say. And yes, I think we would be informed if he was to come back to New York. He's certainly not out yet. He's not gotten out of prison yet because I guess there's not a halfway house that's agreed to take him.
I'm kind of at a loss for words here, but do you think that he was a psychopath? Do you think that there has been redemption? What happens now? What happens with him?
I don't believe. In his past, 10 parole hearings that I can think of off the top of my head, he's lied in every single one. He's tried to downplay his significance in the crime in each and every one. He's said that he was afraid for his life, and it was peer pressure, and he was afraid the other two men would shoot him. But again, he was the guy giving the commands on the day. We witnessed that, we heard that, and following the crimes, he laughed about his prowess during rape. He thought it was funny. He laughed about it for days. There's testimony of many different people mentioning this. And his latest parole hearing, he essentially blamed everything on hatred towards women. This is the first we've heard of this. He's never brought this up before, and then he was angry but because his mother didn't treat him well and his sister, quote-unquote, rejected him, and therefore he took out all of this anger and aggression on my mother and Sheila Watson that day. That's his new excuse.
Is he still... I'm sorry, go ahead. Is he still... The bottom line is, this guy's 68 years old now, and he has this history of psychopathic...
Drugs and violence.
And violence and psychopathic behavior. Is he still a danger to society? And if he is, then what does that say about the criminal justice system?
Well, I believe he is. I mean, he's guilty of one of the most savage crimes in the history of the state of New York. And as I say, he's not shown proper remorse until this very last hearing, in which he was being coached by the parole board members, quite frankly. So no, I don't feel like he's redeemed himself in any way, shape, or form. If he really wanted to show us that he was redeemed and cared about us, then he would just stay in prison. He wouldn't fight so hard to get out.
I think one of the things that you've said in other articles written about your reaction to this is that for most of the parole hearings in the past, or all of them before this one, you or your sibling, or both of you, were at the hearing, but this, because of COVID, this was not possible.
Well, it's you actually sit with one parole board member and a stenographer and somebody from the Office of Victims Assistance in a conference room, essentially, but you're able to speak to somebody one-on-one, and that parole board member might not even be on your case. I mean, might just relays the information essentially to the rest of the rest of the board, or those board members who will be on the case. This year, I had to drive to get reception to a McDonald's parking lot and pull over and relive the whole thing on the phone, because for some reason they didn't even allow us to Zoom with a board member. So it was disappointing because, of course, although that board member is not necessarily going to be, listening to Ayala, it's just there's more. I've always got a lot more out of speaking with somebody and seeing somebody face to face.
Have you ever had the opportunity to verbally confront Ayala?
No, I tried, actually. Well, I had a long mail correspondence with James Walls for quite a while. I wrote to Willie Prophet, who called me. We spoke on the phone in the early 90s, and I had attempted to get in touch with Sam Ayala many times, too, and I finally was able to get his counselor on the phone. I think he was in Greenhaven at the time, and she said, "I'm sorry, I don't think it would be good for Sam to talk to you."
Did you ask what she meant by that?
I knew what she meant. She thought that it would be, I think she thought it might be damaging to his psyche, or he wouldn't be happy with it. I mean, it was ridiculous.
But apparently, you did apparently speak with family members, with Sam's family members.
Yes, his about 6 years ago, his daughter, one of his daughters, called me. I think she was in Texas at the time. She told me a story about how her own mother died the same way at the hands of another man, was raped and murdered in Chicago, I think in the 80s, when Sam Ayala was in prison. She was really lovely, and I felt an immediate bond with her because of what we had both been through. And in the end, I just had to ask, what did your father say happened that day? And she said, well, my dad was outside the whole time. He was the driver. He didn't commit any of the violence that day. And I didn't have the heart to tell her that
it was him.
Absolutely not the case. I didn't, and I should have, and I regret it. And the next time I tried to call her, a month or so later, her number was disconnected, and I was never able to track her down again. But the thought of him, this poor woman now is going to have her father who's been lying to her, her father who essentially, could have murdered her mother as well. Now living with her, it's pretty heartbreaking.
But how does the parole board, I mean, I know you're not a psychoanalyst, but how does the parole board rationalize granting him parole, and we could only.
We're not going to be able to get that answer.
The music is playing, so we're going to have to follow that up on the other side of the break.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many unanswered questions in this case. There are 2 women who were brutally murdered. There are children who had to witness this and have to carry this for the rest of their lives. And you have a parole board which says, okay, fine, we will grant this person parole.
They were deaf to the issues of the family.
Right.
Anyway, we're going to have to take another break now. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Jason Minter, not wanting him to relive the horror of that night, but to discuss the aftermath. This is Westchester Eye on the radio. We'll be right back.
WVOX. Let's return to Westchester Eye on the radio with Peter Moses on 1460 WVOX.
Here we are. It's 3:35, and we are Westchester Eye on the radio, and we are having a sort of, I don't even know how to describe the discussion. It's a sad but enlightening discussion about the criminal justice system. I'm with Jason Minter.
The failings.
The failing of the criminal justice system. And Jason Minter's mother, Bonnie Minter, along with Sheila Watson, was horrifically murdered in 1977 in South Salem, New York, by 3 men. One who passed on in prison, one who was paroled earlier, and another one who was a ringleader, Samuel Ayala, who has been paroled and is just waiting for housing, and he will be free again in society. He's 68 years old, and he has been registered as a level 3 sex offender, which is part of his parole, which is the highest level of sex offender, and it carries a charge saying that he is one who is likely to re-offend. Not he himself, but the charge of level 3 sex offender means that that individual could re-offend again. And here again, he has been released, or about to be released into society, and there's certainly cause for concern. So, Jason, what are your thoughts on this, and how do we, as a community, protect ourselves from people who have a violent history? I mean, this guy apparently has a whole thing against women, and he stated it himself. He didn't exactly call it a hatred of women, but he seemed to detail a very disturbing past with women.
He did, and I think that further proves that he should have stayed in prison. I think that he should have kept his line that he didn't know what was going to happen, and he had no control over what was going on, because I don't know. To me, it's saying I felt this. I think he did say I hated women. I don't know. I mean, it seems like there should be less of a chance of him walking on the streets with the rest of us. I don't know. If Ayala, I know he had a decent prison record, and I guess that's now the only criteria for being released, regardless of what you've done to other people, regardless of how heinous your crime is. If you've served a bunch of time and you have been a good person in prison, then I guess you can get out regardless of what you've done.
Which basically means very little, because it's one thing. Prison society is highly structured. When you get out into mainstream society and you have the stresses and the strains of mainstream society without that prison structure, then it becomes a whole different set of behavior.
Right.
I also want to ask.
No controls.
And no controls.
Now, he will have controls at the outset, because he'll be going to a halfway house, and very possibly, from what we've talked about off mic, in Westchester.
Yes. No, certainly in Westchester. That's where the crimes are committed.
Yeah, which is important to note that he is going to. I mean, he's not going to be in, Oshkosh someplace. He's going to be in he's going to be in a nearby town in Westchester County.
Yes, he'll be within a bus ride of where we all live.
within a bus ride of where we all live now. Is part of parole, part of the conditions of parole, is there a psychological evaluation? In other words, what I'm saying, is there a person in position of authority who can tell you how likely he is to reoffend? How do we know that he's truly been redeemed and that he's not going to do this again? Is there a clinical expert that can say, okay, he's got a 90% chance of repeating, or he's okay, he's got a 10% chance of repeating because he's had the counseling that he's gotten the counseling that he needs in prison?
Well, there's something called a compass risk assessment, which I believe sort of gives the odds of whether he'll reoffend or not. And I guess his results have been good in prison. I really don't understand. I think it's based on algorithms and other things, but certainly not real life. So it's going to be interesting to see how he fares when he gets out, and how he'll live his life. I just don't know, but I do know there is a chance that he'll become aggressive again, and that aggression could easily be directed toward me or anyone else for that matter.
Yeah, do you remember? I'm sure you both remember Joel Steinberg.
Oh yeah.
I photographed Joel Steinberg. And Joel Steinberg was one of the most evil people that ever walked the face of the earth. He was a scary guy.
His mother lived in Yonkers, very close to where you live now.
Yeah.
And I interviewed the mother, and that picture of Joel Steinberg pushing Lisa on the swing was one his mother gave to me, and the Post kept it. They wouldn't let me return it to the mother, which was another story. He got out of prison for killing Lisa.
Yeah, and
he moved to Harlem. He stayed in New York. His halfway house is in Harlem, and he stayed there.
Yeah, that's where James Walls' halfway house is, also in Harlem. But
probably the same place, possibly the same place.
Yeah, yes. But Walls, is a whole other kettle of fish. We're supposed to actually get together and sit down and talk, and he actually wrote a letter on our behalf, stating that James Walls did. Stating that Ayala should not be released under any circumstances. They didn't really know each other. They only met him that day, but he.
Why did they pick that house?
For years I thought there might be some sort of odd conspiracy, and I looked at every single angle because they had hit some houses previously that day, but there had been nobody home. They broke into a house across the street. People had a giant Rottweiler. Willie Prophet took the butt of his gun and broke the dog's jaw. They removed parts of walls and ceilings. They did very strange things. It looked as if they were looking for something, to me at least. And my assistant principal at Meadow Pond Elementary School was driving down Smith Ridge Road, and there was a van moving very slowly in front of him, and it stopped short right at the Watson driveway, and he noticed the first 3 letters of the license plate just because of that quick incident, and the van just took a left and just drove quickly up the Watson driveway, which was, an eighth of a mile long or something. The houses were pretty far apart. And of course, at that time, I was home at our house playing with the Watson son, Lucas, and my sister was in the Watson house at the time. But it would appear to have been random, but it's very strange.
Now, your parents were married or divorced?
No, they were married, yeah.
And so you stayed with your dad?
Yes.
You and your sister stayed with it. And how did you cope with it for the first few years? Were you in intense therapy? Was your sister
we were
in intense therapy?
Certainly. I mean, we were in therapy. My father's second marriage didn't last very long, probably from 79 to 80 or 81, as I recall. We moved out of South Salem soon after to Katona, where we lived for many years. There was quite a bit of therapy. I was in Four Winds, and but I couldn't really. I mean, for the first couple of months, I thought maybe my mother would come back. For the first day, I didn't even know she was dead. Nobody told me. They just assumed that I figured it out, but I really didn't until quite a few hours later. But as a child, it was very hard to comprehend the gravity of what had occurred. I remember my principal, and when I was in the second grade telling me that if you're ever feeling like getting out of the classroom, just tell the teacher and you can come talk to me. And I thought, wow, what a great privilege! I can't believe it. Why do I can get out anytime I want? So I just couldn't really comprehend the gravity of it all.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can't even imagine the life that you've led. And the fact is that when we come back, we're going to talk about you today and your life subsequent to your mom's being killed. Because Jason, you've had a happier life. I mean, you have a wife, you have a child, you operated a business successfully for many years. People in the neighborhood where you had the business revered you. And I read all these reviews about that place. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit about Jason today. And hopefully you guys will stick with us, because this is a really interesting show today.
Let's return to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back for the final quarter hour of Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses. Ardina Seward's with me today. And we have Jason Minter, who is was himself a crime victim, because he was there when his mother was murdered with his mother's friend in 1977. And the man who's responsible for the double murder, Sam Ayala, is going to be getting out of prison soon, because the parole board, in its infinite lack of wisdom, decided that he's no longer a danger to society and he's fulfilled his debt. Now, I am sure in the aftermath of what happened to your mom that you and your sister, and probably your dad too, went into long-term therapy.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I've been in therapy on and off for 44 years now, and therapy was very intense when we were younger. Essentially, I have no memory of my mother except from that day. It's all been wiped away. I was 6 years old, nearly 7, and I also have long-term memory loss, I think, as well. And I've been told it has to do with PTSD. But as I get older, it doesn't get any better. I think it actually gets a little bit exacerbated and gets a little bit worse. And of course, night terrors and nightmares and paranoia. As a child, I was obsessed with home security. I had guns. I had bows and arrows, crossbows. I ordered cases of fireworks from down south and opened them up and made bombs and nailed windows shut in the house, had a closed circuit television system with my room and a camera in the hallway so that I could watch it. I was extremely paranoid. I'm less so these days, but with Ayala's release, a lot of that has sort of been brought back, unfortunately. But
you had to, as a young child, and your sister too, you had to rebuild or build a life after that.
Well, our childhood was gone immediately. I mean, I became an adult, on that day. That was it.
At 6 years old.
At 6 years old. And, there were other issues after that with, my stepmother afterwards, immediately following. My father's very happily and successfully remarried now. He remarried in, I think it was 82 or 83. But prior to that, prior to my current stepmother, my father's second wife was pretty disastrous. There was a lot of abuse there, more issues, more therapy.
And yet you graduated high school.
I did.
You graduated college.
I went to film school. I actually left early because I started working in the business. So I.
Did you work on any films or TV shows that we would know of?
Oh, yes, sure. Law & Order was my first job. New York Undercover, The Sopranos for 10 years. For 4 of those years, I was David Chase's right-hand man. I was his assistant, and I ran the writer's office. I wasn't a writer, but I facilitated everything between the writer-producers and the directors and the actors.
And then you decided to move to a new profession.
I made a brilliant decision. It wasn't very brilliant. I made the decision to open a restaurant, which
Indian Road
was difficult. Yes, Indian Road Cafe, which I I'm no longer running. I haven't been operating it for a year and a half. But
the reviews of that restaurant prior to your leaving were through the roof.
It was a real
Open Table, Yelp, TripAdvisor, and then it went completely downhill after you left.
Well, yes. I mean, there's always a learning curve, and you know.
Yeah, but treating customers badly.
But that wasn't
it's
under
not a
his
learning
watch.
curve issue.
That was
it's a
after the-
hiring problem.
But that was
after you left.
Right. Well, no one that I work with is still there. I mean, it's a whole new crew. And of course, I've since moved from the neighborhood, so I haven't been in that often. But there have been some nice changes. There's been some nice renovations. I have to go take a look. But I did go back to film and television about a year and a half ago. So.
And you're doing now. Okay, so let's talk about your film and television resurrection. So,
Yes.
so tell us what you're doing now.
I work in locations. I location scout and location manage, and I'm working on a show based on a podcast called Dr. Death for NBC about a neurosurgeon in Texas. It's a true story. He was sort of survived on his charisma, didn't really learn anything in medical school, was a narcissist, an addict, and of I think the 34 people he operated on, I think most of them were paralyzed or killed on the operating table. It's an interesting story. Yeah,
Maybe Ayala could get him as a doctor.
Yeah, that's a nice thought. Yeah, he went to jail for murder, and he's probably never getting out. So go figure.
So this is based on a true story.
It is a true story. Yeah. So that's the problem. Yeah, I was working on that up until COVID, and of course I had an extended vacation for 5 months, and I've just gone back to work.
And you're working as a writer, or you're working?
No, I'm a location scout. I
Locations?
run locations basically.
Okay,
Yeah, find them and run them.
Just in the New York metropolitan area?
Yes, for the most part. The last show I was on was all New Jersey, or mostly New Jersey.
Now, the years you worked on The Sopranos, did everyone know your story?
David Chase knew of it, and some other people knew of it, but at the time I wasn't very public about it because, as far as I knew, these guys would never be released. I only started becoming vocal when I started to become nervous about 5 or 6 years ago, when I realized there was a possibility of Ayala actually getting out. I mean, as I say, Prophet had died already, and I don't think Prophet was ever going to get out because he had a terrible prison record, and he was like Michael Myers from Halloween. When I spoke to him on the phone, he was just dead, just spoke in a monotone, and you could tell there was just nothing there, just a complete and utter sociopath.
Okay, so you worked in television, you've worked in movies, and do you get lost when you're doing that work? And is it a release from your life when you're doing that kind of work?
It is nice to be back to work now. I mean, I kept pretty busy over this unexpected hiatus, I guess we'll call it. But no, it's certainly nice to be back, and I mean, I've been knee deep in this Ayala situation for 2 months now, and it's nice to be distracted from it to a degree, although...
Have you heard any... Although what? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, on one hand, it's almost a relief not to have to deal with this every 18 months, going back before the board, getting more signatures on our petition, having politicians write, and police chiefs and so on. We tried to sort of outdo ourselves at each hearing so that the board would hear us. It's kind of a relief not to have to do that stuff anymore, but now we're into new territory and new feelings, and things are raw again with his imminent release.
And it should be noted that the Westchester County DA himself, DA Scarpino, was against.
Oh, he's furious.
Was furious. Tell us.
Well, when Ayala and Prophet and Walls were sentenced, the murder sentences could only run concurrently and were 25 to life. So Prophet and Ayala got 2 25-year life sentences, but they ran concurrently, so they were up for parole in 2002. 25 years later, 25 years after the crimes, in 1978, that law changed so that those sentences would have run consecutively, and they would not have been out until 2027, or now they had the possibility of getting out until then.
Did Hollywood ever approach you?
No. I have picked up a documentary now and again related to this, but I've never been able to finish it. That's another long story. But the DA had written, just to get back to that other point for just a second, the DA had written a letter to the board in 1990 stating that it was their wish that these guys serve the 50-year sentences, not the 25-year to life sentence.
Right.
And the board did not even inform the district attorney of these hearings coming up, and or Ayala's hearing coming up, and then of course the DA's office was furious.
So the DA's
results.
office never had a chance to plead their
They called it a travesty. Or Scarpino called it a travesty of justice. I mean, he was furious. I mean, the letter is really scathing. I don't think, I doubt they care much about that, but I don't know.
Well,
we're ending our hour now. I'm happy that we did the show on Labor Day. I was kind of like on the fence, but yours is a compelling story that needs to be told and retold, and there needs to be parole reform. I remember I worked for New York State for about 5 or 6 years, and the person who I worked for, when she left the job, she became a parole board person, and she was completely ill-equipped for that. Anyway, we're just about out of time, so we'll be back next week. We're not going to be able to preview the show unless you can do it in 3 seconds.
Michael Unor, who's going to talk about Lola's Restaurant in Great Neck, Long Island, has reopened.
Okay, everybody, have a great rest of the week. Take care now. Thanks, Jason Minter.
Thank you.
WVOX and WVIP HD2, New Rochelle.